Hey guys, tonight we're talking about America's most efficient killer, a drug so deadly it makes the Vietnam War look like a safety seminar. Every single year, more bodies than a decade of jungle warfare, no memorial, no moment of silence, just statistics that politicians quote before doing absolutely nothing. The drug is fentanyl. Same family as your grandmother's pain pills. Same basic chemistry as what the dentist gives you after pulling a tooth. Except this version can kill you in doses you can't even see. A few grains of salt worth. Less than an eyelash weighs. That's all it takes. But before we get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these slow, absurd tales. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're lying right now. Perhaps tucked under a blanket, halfway between curiosity and sleep. Now, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Here's the dirty secret about opioids that nobody in a Just Say No assembly ever told you. They feel incredible. Not pretty good, not pleasant, incredible. Like every problem you've ever had just dissolved into warm honey. Like someone wrapped your entire nervous system in the softest blanket ever made. Like the universe decided you specifically deserved a hug. When fentanyl hits your brain, it crashes into your opioid receptors like a tidal wave hitting a sandcastle. Your body makes its own opioids, endorphins, runner's high, that warm glow after great sex. Natural endorphins are a polite knock on the door. Fentanyl kicks the door down and rearranges your furniture. Your brain floods with dopamine. Pain disappears. Physical pain. Emotional pain. That background hum of anxiety you forgot you were carrying. Gone. All of it. For a few minutes, you feel perfect. Not happy. Perfect. Like this is how you were always supposed to feel. One user described it as being wrapped in God's warmest blanket. Another, returning to somewhere you didn't know you'd been missing. A third, more bluntly, nothing else matters. Nothing else exists. That's the high. That's what people chase. That's why someone puts this into their body knowing it might kill them. For a few minutes it feels like the answer to everything. Then it ends. The come down from opioids isn't like other drugs. Cocaine wears off and you feel tired. Alcohol wears off and you regret some text messages. Opioids wear off and your body declares war on itself. Your brain noticed the flood of feel-good chemicals. It didn't like the surprise, so it adjusted, pulled back its own opioid production. Why make the stuff yourself when someone's delivering? Reduce the receptors. Made itself less sensitive. This is tolerance. That dose that felt like the universe's favourite child last week, now it barely gets you to normal. So you take more. Brain adjusts again. Take more. Adjust again. You're not chasing the high anymore. You're running from the low, and when you stop, when you can't get more, withdrawal. Every nerve ending screams. Your bones ache like they're trying to escape your skin. You sweat and freeze at the same time. Your legs kick on their own. That's where kicking the habit comes from. Not a metaphor. Your legs literally won't stop moving. You vomit. You have diarrhea. Sometimes both at once. You can't sleep, can't stay awake. Your skin crawls like something's living under it. And your brain screams one thing on repeat. Get the drug. Get the drug. Get the drug. This isn't weakness. This isn't moral failure. This is your nervous system holding you hostage. People describe withdrawal as worse than broken bones, worse than surgery, worse than childbirth, and they know one dose would make it stop. One dose and the torture ends. Most people can't resist that. Most people weren't built to. Dying is a maybe. Withdrawal is a certainty. Certainty wins. Now here's where fentanyl gets uniquely evil. All opioids are dangerous. Heroin, OxyContin, morphine. But fentanyl is different. Comparing fentanyl to heroin is like comparing a nuclear submarine to a kayak because they both float. Fentanyl is roughly 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. 100 times. A dose of morphine that would kill you weighs about 200 milligrams, roughly the weight of a few grains of rice. A dose of fentanyl that would kill you weighs about 2 milligrams. 2 milligrams. That's a few grains of salt. That's smaller than a snowflake. That's less than the weight of a single eyelash. You cannot see a lethal dose with your naked eye. Picture a sugar packet, the kind at a diner, about 2,000 milligrams. If that was fentanyl, it could kill 1,000 people. One packet, 1,000 bodies. The math is so horrifying it almost stops being real. And here's the problem. Drug dealers aren't pharmacists. They're not measuring with laboratory precision. They're mixing in basements with whatever equipment they have. The difference between gets you high and stops your breathing is invisible, impossible to achieve without professional tools. Some pills get mixed evenly, most are survivable, but some get a clump, a hot spot, extra powder that didn't spread right. Those pills look identical to the others, same colour, same stamp, same size. But those pills are death sentences, waiting for whoever draws that particular losing ticket. Users call it Russian roulette. Except with Russian roulette, there's one bullet in 6 chambers. With fentanyl, you don't know how many bullets are in the gun. You don't even know if it's the same gun as last time. Here's the twisted part. Fentanyl wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be a miracle. For 30 years it was. The year was 1960. The place was Beers, Belgium, a town so unremarkable that Belgians sometimes forget it exists. The man was Paul Janssen. He was trying to solve a real problem. Anesthesia kept killing people. Surgery in 1960 was a gamble. The drugs that knocked you out were unpredictable. Morphine worked, but it was slow. Took forever to kick in. Took forever to wear off. The dose that worked for one patient killed another. Surgeons saved lives. The anesthesia sometimes ended them. Janssen started tinkering, playing with molecular structures, trying to build something faster, shorter, more controllable. He created fentanyl, fast, hit you in seconds, not minutes. Short, wore off when you needed it to. Precise. Give a little, watch, give more. The anesthesiologist became a pilot instead of a gambler. Surgeries got safer, recovery got faster. Patients stopped dying from guesswork. Fentanyl hit the market in 1968. Within a decade, it was standard in operating rooms worldwide. Janssen became a legend. He'd invent over 80 drugs in his career, but fentanyl was the crown jewel. He took something dangerous and made it precise. A genuine medical breakthrough. He probably assumed his molecule would stay in hospitals forever, in professional hands, under careful control. He had no idea what was coming. For about 20 years, fentanyl stayed in its lane. Hospitals only. Administered by professionals who knew what they were doing. It wasn't a street drug because it didn't make sense as a street drug. You needed syringes. You needed medical knowledge. You needed access to hospital supply chains. If you wanted to get high, heroin was easier. Pills were easier. Fentanyl was too clinical, too controlled. Then came the patches. In 1991, Janssen Pharmaceutica introduced Duragesic, fentanyl in patch form. Stick it on your skin, absorb the drug slowly over 72 hours. Brilliant for cancer patients. Brilliant for chronic pain sufferers. Genuine medical innovation. But patches contain a lot of fentanyl. Enough for 3 days of slow release. A used patch, even after 72 hours, might still hold enough to kill someone without tolerance. And people figured that out fast. Reports started trickling in. Addicts chewing patches to get the fentanyl faster. People cutting them open and extracting the gel. Deaths from patches that had been stolen, bought or fished out of garbage cans. The first cracks in the wall. Fentanyl seeping out of hospitals and into the wild. Still, this was small scale. A leak, not a flood. The real disaster needed different conditions. It needed millions of Americans to become opioid addicts first, and the pharmaceutical industry was working on exactly that. To understand how fentanyl escaped, you need to understand Purdue Pharma, a company called OxyContin, and one of the deadliest marketing campaigns in corporate history. Before OxyContin, doctors feared opioids, legitimately, appropriately. They'd watched patients get hooked. They knew these drugs grabbed hold and didn't let go. They reserved them for serious pain, cancer, major surgery, situations where addiction was a secondary concern. Purdue Pharma decided that fear was bad for business. They funded studies. OxyContin was different, they claimed. The slow-release formula made it less addictive. They sent reps to every doctor's office in America. Charts, graphs, statistics. Addiction risk is less than 1%. They paid experts to give talks, sponsored conferences, built a narrative. America was undertreating pain. Patients were suffering. The fear of addiction was the real problem. The pitch worked. God help us, it worked beautifully. Prescriptions exploded. Thousands became millions. Doctors started handing out opioids for everything. Back pain, arthritis, sports injuries. Conditions that used to get physical therapy now got pills. America became the most opioid-prescribed nation on Earth. 4% of the world's population swallowing 80% of the world's supply. Purdue executives bought mansions. The Sackler family put their name on museum wings. And here's what Purdue forgot to mention. Opioids are addictive. Period. Regardless of slow release, regardless of what the sales rep said, take them regularly and your brain adapts. Take them long enough and you need them to feel normal. Stop taking them and you feel like you're dying. Not metaphorically, literally. By the mid-2000s, America had millions of opioid addicts. Some were street users who found a new supply, but millions were ordinary people. Suburban mums with back pain, construction workers with injuries, retirees with arthritis, people who took OxyContin exactly as directed, found themselves trapped in dependency they never chose, didn't understand. Then came the crackdown, and the crackdown broke everything wide open. By 2010, authorities noticed America had a problem. Their solution: restrict supply, fewer pills, tighter prescriptions, reformulate OxyContin so it couldn't be crushed, shut down pill mills, fewer pills, fewer addicts. Simple math. This is not how addiction works. It's like banning condoms and hoping teenagers won't have sex. The sex continues. You've just made the consequences worse. But that's what they did. Pills got harder to find. Prices exploded. People who were physically dependent, who'd be throwing up within 24 hours without a fix, couldn't get what their bodies required. So they improvised. Heroin had always been around, but it had stigma. Pills were medicine. Heroin was a street drug. Pills came from doctors. Heroin came from dealers. That distinction felt important, until it didn't. When pills dried up, the distinction evaporated. The suburban mum met the street dealer. The construction worker discovered heroin stopped withdrawal just as well as OxyContin. Cost a quarter of the price. People who'd never touched an illegal drug were suddenly buying powder on corners, because the alternative was unbearable suffering. Heroin deaths started climbing. But heroin was just the bridge. The cartels had noticed something, and the cartels had an idea. Mexican drug cartels are many things: brutal, ruthless, terrifying. But stupid isn't one of them. They watch markets. When cocaine dropped, they pivoted to meth. When marijuana got legalized, they found other products. They adapt. They're extremely good at adapting. Early 2010s, they noticed something interesting. America had a massive appetite for opioids, desperate, insatiable, and nobody was satisfying it. Pills were restricted. Heroin helped, but heroin had problems. Poppy fields, harvests, weather, eradication, an entire agricultural supply chain that could be disrupted. What if there was a synthetic option? Something cooked in a lab from chemicals? Something so strong you could ship tiny quantities? Something with profit margins that made cocaine look like a lemonade stand? The something was fentanyl. Precursor chemicals from China. Legal, industrial, legitimate paperwork. Synthesis wasn't complicated for people who already ran drug labs. No poppy fields, no harvests, no farming. Just chemistry. The economics were insane. A kilogram of fentanyl cost a few thousand to produce. That same kilogram, cut and sold, generated over $1 million. Profit margins unlike anything the drug trade had ever seen. But the same property that made it profitable made it deadly. Too strong. The margin between high and dead was invisible. Quality control was impossible with street equipment. The cartels were shipping concentrated death, trusting random dealers to dilute it properly. They did not care. They cared about money. First wave hit around 2013. Fentanyl mixed into heroin. Users didn't know. They just noticed the high was different, stronger, and friends who'd been using for years were suddenly dead on the floor. Then came the counterfeit pills. Cartels started pressing fentanyl into pills that looked exactly like pharmaceuticals. Fake Oxy, fake Percocet, fake Xanax, fake Adderall. Same stamps, same colours, same everything, identical to the real thing. Someone buying Oxy might actually be buying fentanyl. Someone buying Xanax for anxiety might be buying an opioid. They might not know fentanyl exists. Might think they're getting what their friend took last month with no problems. But that pill isn't oxycodone, it's fentanyl, and the dose that used to get them high is about to stop their lungs. Death toll exploded, not just addicts dying. Teenagers who took a pill at a party. College kids who bought fake Adderall to study. Adults who got a Xanax from a friend after a hard week. People who never touched opioids intentionally. People who avoided them specifically. People who just ran into a drug supply that had become a minefield. By 2016, fentanyl was the leading cause of overdose deaths. By 2017, not even close. By 2021, over 100,000 Americans dead in a single year. Most of them fentanyl, a sold-out stadium, a small city. Every year, and it keeps getting worse. Carfentanil showed up around 2016. Elephant tranquilizer, 100 times stronger than fentanyl, 10,000 times stronger than morphine. A dose you can't see can kill. A few milligrams could kill a room full of people. Then fentanyl started showing up in cocaine, in meth. People who specifically avoided opioids dying from opioids hidden in other drugs. This isn't an addiction crisis anymore. It's a poisoning crisis. You can't just say no to something you don't know you're taking. Paul Janssen died in 2003, never saw the counterfeit pills, never saw the contaminated supply, never saw his medical miracle become a mass murderer. He thought he'd made something helpful. He had. We turned it into something else, a molecule designed to save lives in surgery, worked exactly as intended for 30 years. Now killing an American every 5 minutes. The chemistry didn't change. We did. Purdue created the addicts. The government created the shortage. The cartels filled the vacuum. And now, fentanyl flows through every border, every mail system, every corner of every city. And the war on fentanyl was about to begin. Somehow, impossibly, it would make everything worse. The United States government has never met a drug problem it couldn't make worse. This isn't cynicism, this is history. Every single drug crisis in American history has been followed by a government response that somehow managed to increase suffering while decreasing results. It's almost impressive. Like watching someone try to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. then blaming the fire for not cooperating. Fentanyl was about to get the full treatment. By 2015, the bodies were piling up fast enough that even Congress noticed. And when Congress notices something, you know it's either an election year or the problem has gotten so catastrophic that ignoring it would require actual effort. Overdose deaths were shattering records. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Coroners were running out of space. Small towns that had never seen a drug problem were suddenly burying their children. Something had to be done. And in Washington, something usually means the same thing we tried last time but louder. The first response was predictable. Go after the supply. Find where the fentanyl is coming from and stop it. This is the drug war playbook. It's been the drug war playbook since Nixon declared drugs public enemy number one in 1971. It has never worked. Not once. Not with marijuana. Not with cocaine. Not with heroin. Not with meth. But surely this time would be different. The fentanyl was coming from China. Mostly. Chinese chemical companies were synthesizing the precursors, the raw ingredients, and shipping them to Mexico. Mexican cartels were doing the final cook and pushing the product north. Simple supply chain. Chemistry to cartel to consumer. 3 steps to death. So the United States did what it always does. Diplomatic pressure, sanctions, angry letters, strongly worded statements, the full arsenal of American disappointment. China responded by scheduling some of the precursor chemicals, made them harder to produce legally, announced crackdowns, arrested some manufacturers, held press conferences, very cooperative, very concerned. Such good partners in the fight against drugs. The fentanyl kept flowing. See, here's the thing about chemical precursors. There are a lot of them. You ban one, chemists find another. You ban that one, they find a third. It's like playing whack-a-mole, except the moles have chemistry degrees and financial incentives. Every time you swing the hammer, 2 more moles pop up somewhere else. China banned fentanyl analogues as a class in 2019. Big announcement. Historic cooperation. Finally getting serious. The precursor chemicals just shifted to different compounds. Slightly different molecules. Same end result. The supply chain adjusted and kept moving. It always does. This is the fundamental problem with supply-side drug enforcement. You're trying to stop chemistry. Chemistry doesn't care about laws. Chemistry doesn't read the Federal Register. Chemistry just happens wherever someone has the knowledge and the motivation. And when the profit margins are 1 kilogram equals $1 million, motivation is not in short supply. Meanwhile, at the southern border, a different kind of theatre was playing out. Build the wall became a political rallying cry. Stop the drugs at the border, seal it up, keep the poison out. Very simple, very satisfying, very completely missing the point. Here's the problem with stopping fentanyl at the border. A lethal dose is invisible to the naked eye. A kilogram, worth over $1 million on the street, fits in a shoebox. You could tape enough fentanyl to kill 1,000 people inside a birthday card and mail it. The border wall was designed to stop people, human beings, things that are 5 to 6 feet tall and can't fit through mail slots. Fentanyl is not a person. Fentanyl is a powder. Powder doesn't climb walls. Powder goes through ports of entry in trucks. Powder goes through the mail in envelopes. Powder gets hidden in shipments of legitimate goods, buried in car panels, stuffed in body cavities. A wall is approximately useless against powder. Most fentanyl comes through legal ports of entry, in vehicles, driven by people with legitimate paperwork, hidden in compartments that customs officers don't have time to find because there are 10,000 trucks to process and maybe 30 seconds per truck. The wall isn't where the drugs come through, it's where the photo ops happen. But invest in better scanning technology at ports of entry doesn't fit on a baseball cap. hire more customs officers and pay them enough to resist bribes doesn't get crowds chanting. The wall was never really about stopping drugs. It was about looking like you were stopping drugs. And in politics, looking like you're doing something is often more important than actually doing something. The fentanyl kept flowing. Through the ports, through the mail, through 1,000 different channels that no wall could ever block. Because you can't build a wall against chemistry. Okay, new plan. If you can't stop it at the source, and you can't stop it at the border, stop it on the streets, arrest the dealers, lock them up, take the product off the market one bust at a time. This is the arrest your way out of it strategy. It has a long and distinguished history of complete failure, but that's never stopped anyone from trying it again. Police departments got funding, task forces were created, DEA agents were deployed, impressive press conferences were held, featuring tables covered with seized drugs and cash and guns. Very photogenic, very satisfying, very much not solving the problem. Here's why arresting dealers doesn't work for fentanyl. Actually, here's why it doesn't work for any drug, but especially fentanyl. Drug markets are not like regular markets. In a regular market, if you remove a supplier, it takes time for a new supplier to emerge. There's friction, startup costs, learning curves. The market has gap. Drug markets have no gap. Remove a dealer, and someone else is standing on that corner by sundown. The demand is still there. The supply chain is still there. The profit motive is still there. You've just created a job opening. And in neighbourhoods with limited economic opportunities, there's always someone willing to take a job that pays in cash and doesn't check references. For fentanyl specifically, the math gets even worse. A street dealer might have a few hundred doses on them at any time. The supplier behind them has thousands. The supplier behind them has tens of thousands. The cartel has millions. You can arrest street dealers until your handcuffs wear out, and you're not even denting the actual supply. You're picking leaves off a tree and wondering why the tree keeps growing. And every arrest has costs. The dealer goes to prison, which costs taxpayers money. The dealer's family loses income, which creates more poverty. The dealer's kids grow up with a parent in prison, which increases their likelihood of future incarceration. The neighbourhood sees another young person hauled away in cuffs, which further erodes trust in law enforcement. You've created a cascade of consequences, and the fentanyl is still there. But the press conferences look great. Tables full of seized drugs, serious men in suits talking about getting tough, the appearance of progress without the inconvenience of results. The most darkly comic part of the enforcement response was the decision to start charging dealers with murder. The logic went like this. If someone sells drugs to someone who dies, the dealer is responsible for that death. Charge them with homicide, lock them up forever, that'll teach them. Prosecutors started bringing these cases. Some states passed new laws making it easier. Drug-induced homicide became a legal category. Finally, consequences. Finally, accountability. Except think about who actually sells drugs to people who overdose. It's usually not some cartel kingpin. It's usually a friend, another user, someone who picked up a little extra and shared it. Someone who was trying to help someone else avoid withdrawal. Someone who is, themselves, struggling with addiction. So now you've got addicts being charged with murder for the crime of being addicted alongside someone who died. You've got grieving friends facing life sentences. You've got users being prosecuted as killers because they were in the wrong place with the wrong powder at the wrong time. Does this deter drug sales? No. Drug sales happen because of addiction, and addiction doesn't do cost-benefit analysis. Someone in withdrawal isn't thinking about potential homicide charges 20 years from now. They're thinking about how to stop feeling like death in the next 20 minutes. Does this reduce overdose deaths? Also, no. What it does do is make people afraid to call 911 when someone overdoses. If you might be charged with murder for being present at an overdose, you might hesitate before making that call. You might wait. You might hope they'll wake up on their own. Those minutes of hesitation can be the difference between life and death. Good Samaritan laws were supposed to protect people who call for help, but they don't protect you from homicide charges. And "I might go to prison for murder" tends to override "I should call an ambulance" in the panic of watching someone turn blue. The drug-induced homicide prosecutions continued. The overdose deaths continued. The only thing that changed was that more users were now also convicted killers. Progress. There was one bright spot in the response. One thing that actually worked. One intervention that genuinely saved lives. Narcan, naloxone, the overdose reversal drug. Narcan is basically a miracle in a nasal spray. Someone stops breathing from an opioid overdose, you spray it up their nose, and within minutes they're conscious again. It blocks the opioid receptors, kicks the fentanyl off them, and restarts the breathing. Not always. Not for every overdose. But often enough that it saved hundreds of thousands of lives. The push to make Narcan widely available was one of the few genuinely good policy decisions in this entire disaster. Police started carrying it. Firefighters, EMTs, schools, libraries, parents of addicts, the addicts themselves. Anyone who might encounter an overdose could have the tool to reverse it. This wasn't without controversy because nothing is ever without controversy. Some people argued that Narcan enabled drug use. Why would addicts stop if they knew they could be revived? It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for overdoses, a safety net that encouraged risk-taking. This argument is exactly as stupid as it sounds. It's like arguing that seatbelts encourage reckless driving, that fire extinguishers encourage arson, that lifeguards encourage drowning. People don't use fentanyl because they think Narcan will save them. People use fentanyl because they're addicted, and addiction is not a choice you make after carefully weighing the pros and cons. The Narcan distribution expanded, lives were saved. This was good. But here's the thing about Narcan. It's a rescue tool, not a solution. It saves someone from dying today. It doesn't stop them from using tomorrow. Every person revived by Narcan is a person who will likely use again, and might overdose again, and might need Narcan again. Until and unless they get treatment for the underlying addiction, Narcan is just a pause button on a death that keeps trying to happen. Narcan saved lives, but it didn't reduce addiction. The deaths kept climbing even as the revivals climbed too. More people survived their overdoses. More people also died from them. Both numbers went up together because the supply was still flowing and the demand was still there and nothing fundamental had changed. Treatment. The word that everyone agrees is important and nobody wants to pay for. If you want to actually reduce overdose, deaths, you need to reduce addiction. If you want to reduce addiction, you need to provide treatment. This is not controversial in the medical community. This is not debated among addiction specialists. This is as close to settled science as anything gets in medicine. Medication-assisted treatment works. Methadone works. Suboxone works. They reduce cravings. They prevent withdrawal. They let people stabilize their lives, hold jobs, maintain relationships, function as human beings. They reduce overdose deaths by 50% or more. The evidence is overwhelming. But treatment requires funding. Treatment requires facilities. Treatment requires trained staff. Treatment requires insurance coverage. Treatment requires political will to spend money on people that a lot of voters would rather see punished. In most of America, if you're addicted to opioids and you want treatment, good luck. Waiting lists stretch for weeks, months. The closest facility might be hours away. Your insurance might not cover it. You might not have insurance at all. And while you're waiting, the addiction doesn't pause. The cravings don't take a number and sit politely in the lobby. People die on waiting lists. People die because they couldn't get an appointment. People die because the treatment they needed existed. Somewhere, but not anywhere, they could access it. We have the tools to save them. We just don't have the infrastructure to deliver those tools. Meanwhile, prison beds are always available. Jail cells never have waiting lists. We've built an entire system optimized for punishment and left treatment as an afterthought. Then we wonder why the deaths keep climbing. The math is absurd. It cost about $35,000 a year to incarcerate someone. It cost about $6,000 a year to provide methadone treatment. For the price of one prison bed, you could treat 6 people. And the treated people actually get better. The imprisoned people mostly don't. But prisons are concrete. Prisons are visible. Prisons let politicians say they're being tough on crime. Treatment centres are quiet. Treatment centres don't make the news. Treatment centres help people who large portions of the electorate have decided don't deserve help. So we kept building prisons, and the deaths kept climbing. First responders are breaking. Paramedics who used to see one overdose a month now see one overdose a shift, sometimes more. They revive the same people over and over. They watch people die despite their best efforts. They deliver death notifications to families who are still processing the words. They go home and try to sleep and see blue faces in their dreams. The burnout rate is catastrophic. The PTSD rates are through the roof. First responders are leaving the profession in droves because you can only watch so many people die, so many families shatter, before something in you breaks too. Firefighters who signed up to pull people from burning buildings are spending most of their time responding to overdoses. Police officers who wanted to catch bad guys are finding body after body after body. Emergency room nurses are watching the same patients cycle through again and again, never getting the treatment they need, always coming back worse. The system is exhausted. The people running the system are exhausted. And the crisis keeps growing. Small towns are being hollowed out. Places that never had drug problems are now leading the nation in overdose deaths. Rural communities where everyone knows everyone are burying kids who grew up together. Churches are holding funerals every week. High school graduating classes are missing members who didn't make it to graduation. The economics of despair feed into it. Factory closes. Jobs leave. Young people have nothing to do and nowhere to go. Opioids show up and offer an escape. Fentanyl shows up and offers death disguised as escape. There are towns in Appalachia where the life expectancy is dropping. Not stagnating. Dropping. The generation being born today is expected to live shorter lives than their parents. This doesn't happen. This isn't supposed to happen. Life expectancy goes up. That's what progress means. Fentanyl is erasing progress. Fentanyl is turning back the clock. Fentanyl is killing people so fast in some places that the demographics are shifting. These aren't statistics. These are communities watching themselves disappear. The pharmaceutical companies that started this, they're doing fine. Purdue Pharma eventually pleaded guilty to federal charges, admitted they'd lied about addiction risks, paid billions in fines, went through bankruptcy. The Sackler family agreed to pay $6 billion and got immunity from future lawsuits. $6 billion sounds like a lot. It's not. The Sacklers made more than that. They're still rich. They still have mansions and art collections and family offices managing their wealth. They got to keep most of what they earned by creating millions of addicts. The fine was a cost of doing business, a very profitable business. No one from Purdue went to prison. No executive served time. The company admitted to crimes that killed hundreds of thousands of people, and the punishment was money. Money they could afford. Money that didn't even dent their lifestyle. Compare that to the kid serving 20 years for selling pills on a corner. Compare that to the addict doing a decade for possession with intent. Compare that to the thousands of people sitting in prison right now for drug offences that caused a tiny fraction of the harm Purdue caused. The system isn't blind. It sees very clearly. It just sees some people as criminals and other people as businessmen. The distinction has nothing to do with the amount of death you've caused. By 2023, the fentanyl crisis was worse than ever. Not plateauing, not declining. Worse. Over 100,000 overdose deaths per year, most of them fentanyl. The number had doubled in 5 years. All the enforcement, all the crackdowns, all the task forces, and press conferences and strongly worded statements. The number doubled. Fentanyl was now in everything. Cocaine, meth, counterfeit pills of every variety, MDMA, ketamine. If it came in powder or pill form and you didn't get it from a pharmacy, it might contain fentanyl. The contamination was so widespread that drug checking services, places where you could test your drugs before using them, were finding fentanyl in substances that had never historically contained opioids. The cartels had gotten more efficient. The supply chains had gotten more resilient. The product had gotten more potent. Every obstacle the government threw up, the market routed around, water flowing downhill, finding every crack, never stopping. And now there's something new, xylazine, a veterinary tranquilizer, not an opioid, doesn't respond to Narcan, causes wounds that won't heal, flesh that rots. They're calling it tranq on the streets. It's being mixed with fentanyl to extend the high. The crisis is mutating. Every time we think we understand it, it evolves. Every time we think we've seen the worst, something worse appears. The floor keeps dropping. So where does that leave us? We've tried supply interdiction. Failed. The supply keeps coming. We've tried border enforcement. Failed. The drugs come through legal ports of entry. We've tried arresting dealers. Failed. New dealers replace old dealers overnight. We've tried harsh sentences. Failed. Deterrence doesn't work on addiction. We've tried drug-induced homicide charges. Failed. Made things worse, actually. The only thing that's shown any real effect is treatment. And we've chronically, catastrophically underfunded treatment. We've built a system that's optimized for punishment and wondering why people keep dying. The war on fentanyl isn't being lost. It was lost before it started. You cannot win a war against chemistry. You cannot arrest a molecule. You cannot build a wall against powder. The entire framework is wrong. What would actually work? Treat addiction like the medical condition it is. Fund treatment on the scale of the crisis. Stop criminalizing sickness. Provide safe consumption sites where people can use under supervision and get connected to services. Provide drug checking so people know what they're taking. Provide housing and jobs and reasons to live that don't come in powder form. These aren't radical ideas. They've been implemented in other countries. Portugal decriminalized drugs in 2001 and saw addiction rates drop. Switzerland provides heroin-assisted treatment and saw crime and death rates plummet. These approaches work. We have the evidence. But they require admitting that the war approach has failed. They require redirecting money from prisons to treatment. They require caring about people that large portions of the electorate have decided are acceptable losses. They require political courage, which is the rarest substance of all. So the bodies keep piling up. Every 5 minutes. Another one. While you've been reading this, someone else has died. Several someones. By the time you finish, more will have joined them. They're not just addicts. They're not just criminals. They're not just statistics. They're people who got hurt at work and got prescribed pills. People who tried something at a party. People who bought what they thought was Adderall. People who never touched an opioid in their lives and died from one anyway. They're teenagers and grandparents. Construction workers and college students, mums and dads, brothers and sisters, friends, neighbours, the person you sat next to in class 10 years ago, the kid who used to deliver your newspaper. The crisis doesn't discriminate. Fentanyl doesn't check your demographic profile before it stops your lungs. It just does what chemistry does. The only discrimination is in the response. Who gets treatment and who gets prison? Who gets compassion and who gets contempt? Who gets mourned and who gets forgotten? We've decided collectively that some deaths matter less than others, that some people deserve help and others deserve blame, that the same addiction is a tragedy in some zip codes and a crime in others. The drug doesn't know the difference. The drug just keeps killing. The difference is entirely in how we respond. And so far, our response has been to make everything worse. The war on fentanyl continues. The death toll continues. The policies that have failed continue to be implemented because changing course would require admitting failure, and no one in power wants to do that. Meanwhile, in labs in Mexico and China, chemists are developing new analogues, new compounds, new ways to get the product to market. They're always one step ahead because they only need to succeed once. We need to succeed every time. The next wave is already forming. The next evolution, the next mutation of the crisis. Whatever comes after fentanyl will probably be worse. That's the pattern. That's always the pattern. We had chances to do this differently. We had evidence about what works. We had examples from other countries. We had experts begging to be listened to. We chose not to listen. We chose the comfortable failure over the uncomfortable change. We chose to keep doing what doesn't work because it feels like doing something. And the bodies keep piling up every 5 minutes. Another American dead. Because we still haven't learned that you can't win a war against chemistry. You can only win a war for humanity. And we're not fighting that war, we're not even close. 100,000 dead per year. That's the number. But numbers don't knock on your door at 3 a.m. Numbers don't have mothers who check their phones every hour, hoping and dreading in equal measure. Numbers don't leave behind children who learn to check if a parent is still breathing before saying good morning. So let's talk about the people, the ones who got addicted, the ones who died, the ones who survived, the ones left behind trying to make sense of something that makes no sense at all. The overdose itself is usually quiet. In movies, overdoses are dramatic. Convulsions, screaming, obvious distress that alerts everyone in the vicinity. Real overdoses aren't like that. Real overdoses look like sleep. The breathing slows, then it stops. The lips turn blue. The skin goes pale, then grey. The person looks peaceful, almost, like they're finally resting. Sometimes people die surrounded by friends who think they're just nodding off. Sometimes people die alone, and no one finds them for days. The window for intervention is short. A few minutes without oxygen, and the brain starts dying. Narcan can reverse the overdose, but only if someone is there to administer it. Only if someone notices in time. Only if the Narcan is strong enough to overcome whatever mix of substances is in the person's system. First responders describe the calls as routine now. That's the worst part. How routine they've become. Another overdose, another body, another family to notify. The addresses start repeating, the faces start blurring together. The paramedic who used to cry at overdose scenes doesn't cry anymore. There isn't time. There's always another call. Some people get revived. Narcan yanks them back from wherever they were going. The experience is brutal, instant withdrawal, the opposite of the high, every nerve suddenly screaming. Some people are grateful. Some people are angry. Why did you bring me back? I was finally at peace. They leave the hospital. They use again within hours. The cycle continues until it doesn't. The families exist in a particular kind of hell. A mother describes watching her son disappear. Not physically. He was still there. Still came home sometimes. Still called when he needed money. But the person she raised was gone. replaced by someone who lied constantly, stole from her purse, vanished for days at a time. She'd find him passed out in the bathroom and not know if he was sleeping or dead. She learned to check for breathing before anything else. She tried everything. Pleading, ultimatums, tough love, paying for rehab 4 times, kicking him out, taking him back. Nothing worked. Or rather, things worked for a while, then stopped working. He'd get clean for 3 months, and she'd let herself hope. Then he'd relapse and the hope would curdle into something else. Grief for someone who was still alive. He died on a Tuesday. She found out from the coroner. He'd been dead for 2 days in an apartment across town. Nobody had checked on him. Nobody had noticed. She identified his body and planned his funeral and fielded condolences from people who said things like, "At least he's at peace now and he's in a better place." She doesn't know if he's in a better place. She knows he was 26 years old. She knows she'll never see him again. She knows she did everything she could, and it wasn't enough. She knows she'll spend the rest of her life wondering what she could have done differently. This is one story. There are hundreds of thousands of stories like it. The parents who outlive their children form communities of grief. They find each other online, in support groups, at vigils. They share photos of the people their children used to be, graduation pictures, childhood snapshots, wedding photos from marriages that didn't survive the addiction. They swap stories about the phone calls they dread and the holidays that will never feel normal again. Some of them become activists. They testify before legislatures. They advocate for treatment funding, for harm reduction, for policy changes that might save other families. They turn their grief into purpose, because purpose is easier to carry than purposelessness. Others retreat into silence. The stigma around addiction deaths is different from other deaths. When someone dies of cancer, there's a casserole brigade and an outpouring of sympathy. When someone dies of an overdose, there's awkward silence, whispered conversations about what they were into, what went wrong, whose fault it was. The parents feel judged. Many of them judge themselves. The obituaries often lie. Died suddenly. Died unexpectedly. The family doesn't want the real cause of death in print, doesn't want the neighbours to know, doesn't want the judgment that comes with the truth. So they sanitize it, and the death becomes invisible, and the statistics stay abstract. Some families are more honest. They write obituaries that name the addiction, that describe the struggle, that ask for donations to treatment organisations instead of flowers. These obituaries are acts of courage. They're also acts of desperation. Maybe if people understand what happened, fewer people will have to go through it. The honesty doesn't bring their children back. Nothing brings them back. The families learn to live with an absence that never stops aching. The children left behind are the quietest casualties. Over 10 million American children have had a parent with substance use disorder. Millions more have lost parents to overdose. They grow up in chaos, never knowing if today is a good day or a bad day, if their parent will be present or absent, if the person making breakfast is the same person who will be unconscious by dinner. They learn to take care of themselves early. They learn to take care of their parents too. A 9-year-old checking her mother's breathing. A 12-year-old calling 911 because dad won't wake up. A teenager raising younger siblings because no adult in the house is capable. When the parent dies, the children often enter the foster system, or they go to grandparents who thought they were done raising kids, or they go to relatives who weren't prepared for this. The transition is traumatic on top of trauma. New homes, new schools, new rules, no real time to grieve because survival takes priority. The statistics are grim. Children who lose parents to overdose are more likely to develop addiction themselves, more likely to struggle with mental health issues, more likely to experience poverty, incarceration, early death. The crisis perpetuates itself across generations. The parent's addiction becomes the child's inheritance. Some children break the cycle. They get lucky with foster families or relatives who provide stability. They get access to therapy, support, opportunities. They grow up to be functioning adults who carry their trauma quietly. But even the success stories have a shadow, a parent-shaped hole that never fills in. A 22-year-old woman describes finding her father dead when she was 14. She remembers the colour of his lips, the sound she made when she realised, the way time stopped and then started again. Different. She's in college now. She's doing well. She still can't hear a phone ring without her heart racing, because that's how she found out about her mother's overdose 3 years later. Both parents dead. She's not even old enough to rent a car. The grandparents raising grandchildren is a phenomenon nobody planned for. Across America, people in their 60s and 70s are suddenly parenting toddlers again. Their children, the toddlers' parents, are dead or incarcerated or too deep in addiction to function. The grandparents step in because there's no one else. They're tired. They'd planned for retirement, for rest, for the golden years of visiting grandchildren and then going home. Instead, they're doing school pickups and homework help and all the exhausting work of raising children, but now with aging bodies and fixed incomes. A grandmother in Kentucky describes a situation. She's 67. She has 3 grandchildren, ages 4, 7, and 11. Her daughter died 2 years ago, fentanyl. Her son-in-law is in prison, dealing, ironically, the same drugs that killed his wife. The grandmother took the kids because the alternative was foster care. She loves them. That's not the issue, but she's exhausted. Her arthritis makes it hard to chase a 4-year-old. Her retirement savings are being drained by expenses she didn't anticipate. Her social life has evaporated. Hard to maintain friendships when you're parenting full-time at an age when your peers are travelling. She worries about what happens when she can't do it anymore. She's not young. Her health isn't perfect. If something happens to her, what happens to the kids? Who takes them then? There's no one in line. The safety net has run out. There are support groups for grandparents in this situation. They meet in church basements and community centres, trading tips and venting frustrations and crying together. The groups are getting bigger. The situation is getting more common. These grandparents don't show up in the death statistics, but they're casualties too. Their retirements, their health, their peace of mind. Sacrificed to care for children whose parents were taken by a powder they couldn't see. Whole communities have been hollowed out. Kensington, in Philadelphia, has become the most visible example. A neighbourhood that once had factories and jobs and functioning families now has open-air drug markets and tent encampments, and people slumped on sidewalks in the bent-over posture of heavy sedation. The videos that circulate online make it look post-apocalyptic. Dozens of people in various states of consciousness, some standing frozen in impossible positions, some lying on the ground, some shuffling slowly with wounds visible on their arms and legs. The neighbourhood's nickname is Zombieland. The people who live there, the ones who aren't addicted, describe feeling like they've been abandoned. The local economy has collapsed. Businesses closed because customers don't want to step over unconscious bodies. Property values cratered. Anyone who could leave, left. The people who remain are either trapped by poverty or connected to the drug economy in some way. The city has tried interventions, cleanups that move the encampments from one block to another, police crackdowns that scatter people temporarily, outreach workers who distribute supplies and try to connect people with services. Nothing has solved the problem. The demand is still there. The supply is still there. The despair that drives both is still there. Kensington is extreme but not unique. Similar scenes play out in smaller versions across the country. In Ohio, towns where the factories closed and the pills arrived. In West Virginia hollows where life expectancy is dropping. In rural communities where everyone knows someone who died and the kids leave as soon as they can. The geography of fentanyl deaths maps onto the geography of economic despair. The places hit hardest are the places where hope left first. The drugs moved into the vacuum. In small towns, the crisis is intimate in ways that cities can't replicate. Everyone knows everyone. The kid who overdosed was in your daughter's class. The woman found dead behind the gas station used to babysit your nephew. The dealer who got arrested grew up on your street. There's no anonymity, no distance. The crisis is personal in every direction. The funerals are frequent. The same church, the same cemetery, the same eulogy adapted slightly for different names. The pastor has a template now. He's done this too many times to start from scratch. High school reunions have become memorial services. The 10-year reunion for a class of 200 might be missing 15 people. The 20-year reunion, more. Teachers who've been in the district long enough remember when they started, noticing the uptick in absences, the students who seemed off, the first death, then the second, then too many to count. The survivors carry guilt. Why them and not me? We used together. We bought from the same dealer. We took the same risks. Some cosmic lottery separated the living from the dead, and the living don't know what to do with that. Some of them get clean out of fear. Some of them use harder, trying to join the friends they lost. The town itself feels marked. The reputation spreads. Oh, that's the place with the drug problem. Businesses don't want to locate there. Young people don't want to stay. The decline that started with economic collapse accelerates. The fentanyl didn't cause the death of the town, but it made sure the town couldn't recover. But there are also survivors. People who made it out. People who got clean and stayed clean and rebuilt something from the wreckage. Their stories are complicated. Recovery isn't a straight line. Most people relapse multiple times before something sticks, if it ever sticks. The success stories usually involve many failures first. A man in his 30s describes his journey. 5 years of addiction, 3 overdoses, 2 stints in jail, 4 attempts at rehab. The first 3 rehabs didn't work. Too short, wrong approach, not ready. Whatever combination of factors makes recovery impossible until it isn't. The 4th time, something clicked. He can't fully explain what was different. Maybe he was just tired enough. Maybe the right treatment at the right moment. Maybe luck. He's been clean for 6 years now. He has a job, an apartment, a relationship. He sponsors other people trying to get clean. He speaks at high schools about what addiction really looks like. He's rebuilt a life. But he's also realistic. He knows the statistics. He knows more people die than recover. He knows the treatment system is broken and underfunded and inaccessible. He knows he got lucky in ways that others didn't. He also knows that recovery is permanent work. The addiction doesn't disappear. It waits. Every day is a choice to not use, and some days that choice is harder than others. He'll be in recovery for the rest of his life. That's not a failure. That's just how it works. What does recovery actually look like? Not the Hollywood version. The real thing. For most people who successfully get off fentanyl, it involves medication. Methadone or buprenorphine, both opioids themselves, but longer acting and less euphoric. They prevent withdrawal without providing much of a high. They let the brain stabilize. They buy time for the person to rebuild their life without the constant crisis of finding the next dose. The medication isn't cheating, despite what some people think. It's medicine for a medical condition. No one tells diabetics they're cheating by taking insulin. But the stigma around medication-assisted treatment is intense. Some people feel like they haven't really quit because they're still taking something. Some families pressure them to get off the medication before they're ready. Some treatment programs insist on abstinence-only approaches that statistically don't work as well. The recovery process takes years. The first months are about physical stabilization. The next year is about building structure, routines, habits, reasons to get up in the morning. Then comes the deeper work, processing the trauma that often underlies addiction, rebuilding relationships damaged by years of lies and theft, learning to feel emotions without numbing them. Many people don't make it. They relapse and try again. They relapse and die. They get clean for a year, and then something happens. A loss, a stressor, a moment of weakness, and they're back in the cycle. Recovery is fragile. The margin for error is zero. The ones who make it often credit specific moments. A counsellor who didn't give up on them. A family member who said the right thing at the right time. A bed in a treatment facility that opened up on the day they finally wanted help. The randomness of these moments is disturbing. Survival shouldn't depend on luck, but it often does. The people who work in treatment see both outcomes, the recoveries and the relapses, the successes and the funerals. A counsellor at a medication-assisted treatment clinic describes her caseload. Dozens of patients, each at different stages of recovery. Some are doing well, stable on medication, rebuilding their lives, reconnecting with families. Some are struggling, relapsing periodically, making progress then losing it. Caught in patterns they can't seem to break. She celebrates the successes and mourns the losses. Both happen regularly. A patient she's worked with for 2 years gets a job, finds housing, starts talking about the future. Another patient she's worked with just as long overdoses on the weekend. She goes to the funeral. She goes back to work on Monday. The emotional toll is significant. Burnout is endemic in addiction treatment. The workers who stay tend to have personal connections to the issue. Their own recovery, family members lost, a sense of mission that overrides the exhaustion. They believe in what they're doing even when the outcomes are devastating. The frustration isn't with the patients. The frustration is with the system. Treatment works. The evidence is overwhelming. Medication-assisted treatment reduces overdose deaths by half or more. But treatment is hard to access. There aren't enough providers. Insurance doesn't always cover it. Waiting lists stretch for weeks. People die waiting for treatment that exists but isn't available to them. The counsellor has watched patients die on waiting lists. Patients who wanted help, who asked for help, who did everything right, and still died because the system couldn't see them fast enough. Those deaths feel different from the others. Those deaths feel preventable. Those deaths feel like murder by bureaucracy. The first responders carry their own weight. A paramedic in Ohio talks about the calls. He's been doing this for 15 years. The fentanyl era is different from anything before. Not just the volume, though the volume is crushing, the nature of it. He responds to the same addresses again and again. He knows the houses. He knows the families. He's revived the same person 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. He's given death notifications to people who were expecting it, who asked which one, when they opened the door. The faces stay with him. A teenage girl who looked like she could have been his daughter. A grandmother who'd started using after her husband died. A baby, an actual infant, who'd been exposed to fentanyl somehow and stopped breathing in the crib. He saved the baby. He still sees that face when he closes his eyes. He doesn't talk about it much. His colleagues don't either. There's a culture of stoicism in first response. You process it or you don't, but you don't burden other people with it. You show up for the next call. You do your job. You go home and try to sleep. The PTSD rates among first responders in high overdose areas are staggering. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse, the darkest irony of all. They're burning out faster than they can be replaced. Some departments can't keep paramedics. The job has become too heavy, and yet they keep showing up. Every shift, every call. Because someone has to. A strange solidarity has emerged among the affected. Families who've lost children connect with first responders who tried to save them. Survivors mentor people still struggling. Parents who buried sons end up advocating alongside the counsellors who tried to treat them. The fentanyl crisis has created its own community, bound not by geography or demographics but by loss. They hold vigils, they remember names, they push back against the stigma that says their loved ones deserved what happened to them. They insist on the humanity of people who are often treated as disposable. Every year on International Overdose Awareness Day, they gather. They read names aloud. Thousands of names. Hours of names. Each one a person who was loved by someone. Each one a life that ended too soon. The readings are hard to sit through. That's the point. The scale of the crisis can become numbing. The statistics can wash over you. But sitting in a room while someone reads name after name after name, that's different. That makes it real. The names keep getting added to the list. Every year, more names. No end in sight. What do these human costs add up to? Not just deaths. Deaths are the end, but there's everything that comes before. The years of addiction, the families torn apart, the children traumatized, the communities hollowed, the first responders broken, the treatment workers exhausted, the survivors carrying wounds that never fully heal. For every person who dies, dozens of others are damaged. The mother who'll never recover, the child who'll grow up with a hole in, their life. The friend who found the body, the paramedic who couldn't save them, the ripples spread outward, touching people who never used a drug in their lives. Multiply that by 100,000 every year. That's the human cost of fentanyl, not a number. A cascade of suffering that touches millions of people. An ongoing catastrophe measured in broken hearts as much as stopped ones. The policy debates continue, the enforcement operations continue, the cartels continue. But underneath all of it, there are just people. People in pain. People trying to escape. People who got caught in a machine that doesn't care about them at all. Fentanyl doesn't know their names. Fentanyl doesn't know their stories. Fentanyl is just a molecule, doing what molecules do. The tragedy isn't the molecule. The tragedy is everything around it. The systems that failed. The help that didn't arrive. The lives that could have been different. 100,000 names a year, read aloud at vigils, each one someone's child, each one someone's story, each one proof that this crisis isn't about statistics. It never was. There's a question that haunts anyone who works close to this crisis. Could it have been different? Could the mother have said something that would have changed the outcome? Could the treatment system have worked faster? Could the town have held on if the factory hadn't closed? Could any of this have been prevented if different choices had been made at different moments? The answer is almost certainly yes. Somewhere in the chain of events that leads to each death, there were decision points. Moments when a different choice, by the person, by the family, by the system, might have led somewhere else. But that's not the same as saying any individual is to blame. The decisions were made within constraints. The mother couldn't force treatment that wasn't available. The system couldn't provide resources it didn't have. The town couldn't conjure jobs that didn't exist. Everyone was operating within a structure that was broken from the start. The human cost of fentanyl isn't just the deaths. It's the knowledge that many of those deaths were preventable, that help existed but couldn't be accessed, that people tried and failed because the odds were stacked against them. 100,000 preventable deaths a year. That's not a tragedy. That's an indictment. The people caught in this crisis, the addicted, the dead, the survivors, the families, the first responders, the treatment workers. They didn't create it. They just lived through it. Or didn't. They deserved better. All of them. The mother who buried her son, the child who found her father, the paramedic who can't sleep, the grandmother raising grandchildren at 67, the survivor who rebuilt his life, and the one who didn't get the chance. They deserved a system that worked. They deserved help that arrived in time. They deserved a society that treated addiction like the medical condition it is rather than the moral failure it isn't. They didn't get what they deserved. Most of them still don't. And until that changes, the names will keep getting added to the list. Every year, more names. Every vigil, more candles. Every family, more grief. The human cost continues. So here's the question. The one that hangs over every overdose, every funeral, every policy debate, every grieving parent demanding answers from politicians who somehow always have somewhere else to be. Where does this end? The honest answer is nobody knows. The slightly more honest answer is something strange is happening. And the most honest answer, the one that's actually kind of surprising, is that for the first time in years the numbers are going down, not up. Down. After a decade of relentless climbing, the death toll has finally started to drop. And not by a little, by a lot. The peak hit around 114,000 deaths in the 12-month period ending August 2023. That was the summit. The worst it's ever been. More dead Americans than Vietnam could manage in a decade, happening every single year. Then something shifted. By late 2024, the numbers had fallen to around 87,000. Still horrifying. Still a stadium full of corpses every year, but down almost 25% from the peak. Fentanyl deaths specifically dropped over 30% in a single year. For context, public health officials had been watching the graph climb like a ski slope designed by someone who hates skiers, year after year. Task force after task force, speech after speech, and the line just kept going up. They'd stopped expecting it to ever go down. Then it did. The question that everyone's asking now isn't, why won't this stop? It's, wait, why did it stop? Nobody agrees on the answer, which is very on brand for this entire crisis. Some experts credit harm reduction, Narcan everywhere, test strips legalized, safe consumption sites proving that supervised use prevents deaths. The slow, grudging acceptance that maybe keeping people alive is more important than teaching them a lesson. Some credit better access to treatment, more methadone clinics, more buprenorphine prescriptions, fewer barriers between someone wanting help and actually getting it. Some credit changes in the drug supply itself. Reports suggest fentanyl on the street has become slightly less potent in some areas. Fewer pills testing at lethal concentrations. The market adjusting, possibly because killing your customers is bad for repeat business. And some, the darkest theory, suggest the decline reflects something grimmer. That the most vulnerable people already died. That the fentanyl wave burned through the population most at risk and now there are simply fewer people left to kill. A forest fire that's running out of trees. Probably it's all of the above. Crises this big rarely have single explanations. The decline is likely some combination of everything. Harm reduction and treatment access and supply changes and the grim mathematics of mass death. Whatever the cause, the numbers are going down, for now. The temptation is to declare victory, mission accomplished, crisis solved, time to move on to the next emergency. This would be a mistake, a colossal, predictable, very American mistake. 87,000 dead. Per year is not victory. It's not even close to victory. It's still more Americans dying from drug overdoses than from car accidents and gun violence combined. It's still a sold-out stadium of corpses every year. It's still a small city vanishing annually. The decline is good news. The decline is not the end of the story. And here's the thing about declines. They can reverse. They've reversed before. The opioid crisis has had multiple waves, each one worse than the last. The first wave peaked in 2010. Everyone thought it was getting better. Then the second wave hit. Then the third wave, the fentanyl wave, made everything before look like a warm-up. The infrastructure that produced this crisis is still in place. The cartels are still operating. The demand is still there. The despair that drives people to use is still there. The treatment system is still underfunded. The political will to actually fix things is still mostly absent. A decline is not a solution. A decline is a pause. What happens next depends entirely on whether anyone uses the pause to build something better, or whether everyone just stops paying attention. There's already evidence of the second option. Public health officials are worried about complacency. When the numbers were climbing, there was urgency. Funding flowed. Programs expanded. People cared, or at least pretended to care convincingly enough to vote for things. Now that the numbers are dropping, the urgency is fading. Budgets are being questioned. Programs are being cut. The crisis is becoming yesterday's news, replaced by whatever fresh disaster is currently trending. This is how normalization works. Not through acceptance, exactly. Nobody wakes up and thinks, you know what, 87,000 preventable deaths is fine, actually. It happens through exhaustion, through the slow erosion of attention, through the creeping sense that someone else will handle it now. The families are still grieving. The first responders are still burning out. The communities are still hollowed. But the broader society has moved on to being outraged about something else. There's always something else. The fentanyl dead have become background noise. Very sad, everyone agrees. Anyway, here's what's trending on social media. The drug itself is still evolving. This is worth remembering, even while celebrating the decline. Fentanyl isn't the end point. It's a rest stop on a highway to somewhere worse. The market has been evolving toward more potent synthetic opioids for decades. If heroin was a campfire, fentanyl is a flamethrower. Whatever comes next will make fentanyl look like a candle. Nitazines are already appearing, a class of synthetic opioids first cooked up in the 1950s and immediately shelved because, and this is a direct quote from scientists at the time, they were too dangerous. Too dangerous to use in hospitals, too dangerous to give to patients under careful medical supervision. Naturally, they're now being manufactured in clandestine labs and sold on street corners. Isotonitazine, metonitazine, itudesnitazine, names that sound like rejected Pokemon characters or possibly sneeze sounds. Potencies that make fentanyl look like aspirin's slightly edgier cousin. Some nitazines are estimated to be 5 to 10 times stronger than fentanyl. If fentanyl was a hand grenade, nitazines are the thing the military builds when hand grenades aren't deadly enough anymore. The lethal dose shrinks even further. The margin for error doesn't just disappear, it packs a bag and moves to somewhere very, very small. The test strips that detect fentanyl don't always detect nitazines. The Narcan doses that reverse fentanyl overdoses might not be enough for nitazines. The protocols developed for fentanyl might be obsolete before they're fully implemented. This is the pattern. Every time enforcement pressure increases, the market responds with something smaller and deadlier. It's evolution, but instead of giraffes getting longer necks, it's drugs getting better at killing people. Darwin would be horrified and also sort of impressed. The crisis isn't static. It's a moving target strapped to a rocket. And somewhere, in a lab nobody has discovered yet, someone is synthesizing tomorrow's nightmare for yesterday's prices. The fentanyl crisis is no longer just American. This is a newer development, and it's about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. For years, fentanyl was primarily a North American problem. The supply chains ran from China through Mexico to the United States and Canada. Europe watched from across the Atlantic with the smug concern of someone whose house isn't currently on fire. That's changing. The United Kingdom is seeing fentanyl appear in its drug supply. Not at American levels yet, but the trajectory is familiar. It's like watching someone walk toward a cliff you already fell off. You want to yell. You're not sure they can hear you. They probably think it won't happen to them. Australia is watching nervously. The country has strict border controls and geographic isolation. Being an island surrounded by ocean usually helps keep things out. But fentanyl is small and potent and very good at fitting through cracks. It's the world's worst party guest. Tiny, lethal, and somehow always finds a way in. This globalization means the American decline might be happening just as other countries begin their climb. The crisis isn't ending, it's spreading. The death toll may drop in one place while rising in another. A game of whack-a-mole played across continents. Why is the American decline happening? The honest answer is, nobody's entirely sure, which is a very honest thing for experts to admit and also sort of alarming. The most optimistic explanation is harm reduction. Narcan has been distributed like candy at a parade, except useful candy that saves lives instead of rotting teeth. Test strips have been legalized in most states. Safe consumption. Sites where they exist are proving every day that supervised use prevents deaths. The slow, grudging acceptance that keeping people alive matters more than punishing them might actually be working. There's evidence for this. The places with the most aggressive harm reduction have often seen the steepest declines. The timing correlates. It makes sense. If you give people the tools to avoid dying, fewer people die. Groundbreaking stuff. The treatment explanation also has weight. More people are accessing medication-assisted treatment. More doctors can prescribe buprenorphine. The barriers between "I need help" and "here's help" have gotten slightly lower. Not low enough, never low enough, but lower than they were. Then there's the supply side theory. Reports suggest the fentanyl hitting streets has become slightly less potent in some areas. The DA claims fewer pills are testing at lethal concentrations. Maybe the cartels adjusted their product. Maybe quality control improved. Maybe killing fewer customers is just good business sense, even for drug traffickers. And then there's the dark theory, the grim mathematics theory. The one nobody wants to say out loud, but everyone thinks about. What if the decline is partly because the most vulnerable people already died? The fentanyl wave burned through a specific population with terrifying efficiency. Long-term opioid users, people with severe addiction, people living on the margins with no safety net. What if the death toll is dropping partly because that population has been reduced? Not through treatment, through death. What if the crisis is easing because there are simply fewer people left to kill? It's a horrible thought. It might also be partly true. Epidemics often work this way. They burn through the vulnerable, then slow down naturally. The decline could be victory and tragedy simultaneously. Fewer deaths because of better interventions, and because there are fewer potential victims left. Probably it's all of the above. Harm reduction helping, treatment expanding, supply changing. And yes, the dark mathematics too. Multiple causes producing a single result. The numbers are going down. The reasons are complicated. The future is uncertain. What would actual victory look like? Not just a decline, actual victory. It wouldn't mean 0 overdose deaths. That's not realistic. People have died of overdoses since the first human figured out that certain plants had interesting effects. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is not this. Victory means making fentanyl a manageable problem rather than a national catastrophe. Bringing the death toll down from stadium every year. to something that doesn't require sports metaphors. 10,000 deaths maybe. Still tragic. Still thousands of families destroyed. But not the ongoing mass casualty event that's been streaming live across America for a decade. What would that require? Treatment available to anyone who wants it, immediately, without waiting lists or insurance barriers. Right now, asking for help often means being told help is 6 weeks away. 6 weeks is forever when you're addicted to something that can kill you in 6 seconds. Imagine calling 911 and being told the fire department has a wait list. Harm reduction accepted everywhere, not just in the cities that have already figured it out. Test strips so people know what they're taking. Safe consumption sites so overdoses don't happen alone. The basic acknowledgement that keeping people alive is more important than keeping them pure. Addressing the despair underneath it all, the economic collapse, the social isolation, the pain that makes oblivion attractive. This is the hard part because it means rebuilding things that took decades to destroy. It means caring about communities that have been written off. That's what victory would require. Treatment, harm reduction, hope. The decline suggests some of this is actually happening. Not enough, not everywhere, but some. The harm reduction that was controversial 5 years ago is becoming standard. The treatment that was inaccessible is becoming slightly less inaccessible. The needle is moving. The question is whether it keeps moving, or whether complacency stalls it right when it matters most. So where does this actually end? The scenarios have shifted, but they haven't disappeared. Scenario 1. The decline continues. The harm reduction keeps spreading. The treatment keeps expanding. The death toll drops year after year, slowly, unevenly, until fentanyl becomes a problem rather than a catastrophe. Not solved, never fully solved, but managed, survivable. This is possible. The current data supports it. The trend lines point in this direction. It would require continued attention, continued funding, continued giving a damn, but it's possible. Scenario 2. The decline stalls. The complacency sets in. The funding dries up. The attention moves on. And the death toll finds a floor somewhere terrible. 60,000, 70,000, whatever number America learns to tolerate, and just stays there forever. Another permanent feature of American life, like gun violence, like medical bankruptcy, tragic wallpaper. This is also possible. Historically, it's the more likely outcome. America has a long tradition of getting distracted before finishing things. Scenario 3. The next wave hits. Nitazines become as prevalent as fentanyl, or something else emerges, something nobody's seen yet. The decline reverses. The death toll spikes, and suddenly everyone remembers that the crisis wasn't over. It was just resting. This is the pattern. Every time things seem to improve, something worse appears. The optimism might be premature, the flaw might not be the flaw, the molecule doesn't care which scenario plays out. Fentanyl is still just fentanyl. Same compound from 1960, same structure, same interaction with opioid receptors that makes it useful in surgery and deadly everywhere else. The molecule didn't change. Everything around it changed. And every change was a human choice. A pharmaceutical company chose profit over truth. Regulators chose to believe marketing materials. Doctors chose convenience over caution. When consequences appeared, authorities chose crackdown over treatment. Cartels chose to fill the vacuum. Politicians chose enforcement over health. Voters chose candidates who promise punishment over those who promise compassion. Layer by layer, decision by decision, the crisis was built. Like a house of cards, except the cards are policies, and the house keeps falling on people. The molecule just did what molecules do, bound to receptors, triggered responses, didn't know or care whether it was helping someone through surgery or killing someone in a bathroom. The humans did everything else. That's the lesson of this whole story, really. It didn't have to happen, not like this. Every step along the way, there was a different door available. Every failure was a choice. The dead aren't casualties of chemistry, they're casualties of policy, of greed, of indifference, of a society that decided, again and again, that these particular lives were acceptable losses. The decline is also a choice. It's happening because people made different choices. Because harm reduction advocates fought for years against mockery and opposition. Because treatment providers kept showing up despite underfunding. Because families who lost children turned their grief into activism. The numbers are going down because enough people finally chose to prioritize keeping humans alive over punishing them for being human. That choice has to keep being made. Every budget cycle, every election, every time someone decides whether to fund treatment or build another prison. The decline isn't automatic, it's earned, and it can be lost. There's a generation growing up right now that might never know how bad this got. Kids born in 2020 might grow up in a world where fentanyl is a problem their parents talk about in the past tense, where the death toll is measured in thousands instead of tens of thousands, where the crisis is history instead of current events. Or they might grow up in a world where it got even worse, where the decline was a blip, where nitazines or something else pushed the numbers back up. Which world they inherit depends on choices being made right now, by politicians who could fund treatment or cut it, by voters who could demand action or accept inaction, by communities who could embrace harm reduction or reject it. The molecule doesn't care. The molecule will keep doing what molecules do. What humans do is still being decided. Somewhere right now, someone is taking their first opioid. A prescription after surgery. A pill from a friend. A powder from a stranger. They don't know where it leads. Most of them will be fine. Some of them won't. Somewhere right now, someone is overdosing, breathing slowing, lips turning blue. But also, somewhere right now, someone is administering Narcan. Someone is calling 911. Someone is saving a life that would have been lost 10 years ago. Somewhere right now, a parent is checking their phone, hoping and dreading in equal measure. But also, somewhere right now, a person in recovery is celebrating another day clean. Another week, another year. Somewhere right now, a first responder is heading to another call. But also, somewhere right now, there are fewer calls than there were last year. The crisis continues, but it continues differently than it did before. The question isn't just what happens next. The question is what choices get made next. A medical breakthrough that became a mass casualty event. A war that was lost before it started. A market that keeps evolving. A society that chose punishment over treatment for decades and is finally, slowly, starting to choose differently. All of it adding up to something. A story that isn't over. A crisis that might be peaking. A decline that could be the beginning of the end or just a pause before the next wave. The causes are known. The solutions exist. The evidence is clear. And for the first time in a decade, the evidence is being acted upon. Not everywhere. Not enough. But more than before. The fentanyl crisis isn't a mystery. It never was. It was always a series of choices. And the choices are still being made. The molecule will keep doing what molecules do. What humans do next will determine whether this story ends in tragedy or something else. Something like hope. Something like change. Something like finally learning from the bodies. Until then, the story continues. But for the first time in a long time, it might be continuing towards something better. Might be. Time will tell.